Good morning again, church.
Good morning.
We are on chapter 11 of our Bible study, Experiencing the Power of Life-Changing Faith, and also puts us into chapter 11 of the book of Romans. And just for a quick, getting everybody ready. So next week, on the day that we're actually filming this, for everybody that's online, we will actually begin Advent, basically. I struggle because I'm not really sure. I've never really been sure when Advent officially begins, whether it's actually 24 days before. Right? It's just one of those religious things that somebody came up with. But to me, it's the Christmas season. Can we say? How about we say it that way? Instead of calling it Advent, can we just say we're going to kick off the Christmas season basically next week? Just sounds better. The last two chapters, I'm sharing all this just because to remind you that the last two chapters of this Bible study play right into the study we'll be doing for Advent, which is Do You Hear What I Hear? And so our sermon series will sort of be overlapping for 2 weeks as we prayerfully, it just smoothly segues from the book of Romans right into the Christmas message. So just prepare yourselves for that. Now, and it's really a wonderful, wonderful time for those of you who are following along and getting into the Word. Chapter 11 of the book of Romans is the final. I've been talking about, and even in the Bible study, they've been talking about how each chapter is sort of building up to this thing that the Apostle Paul is trying to get everybody to understand. And chapter 11 is this pinnacle, this turning point, where he talks about the sovereignty of God and how it applies to everybody. And then, as we go into the final few chapters of the book of Romans, it's going to be, well, how do we apply that to our lives? And how does that reflect in our lives? Which is why it's going to play wonderfully into the Christmas message. But the very first part of this, I'm going to do a little historical thing first, and then I'll get into the fun part of the message here. The first 3 verses, I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? May it never be, for I too am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. So, what he's trying to clarify to everybody is because in the first 10 chapters, he's talking about he has come to share the message to the Gentiles. And basically saying, look, the Jews have rejected Jesus. And in essence, rejected God. And that God now is for all people. And he has been sent to preach to the Gentiles. And so then the argument that comes up is basically, well then, has God turned his back on the Israelites? Does that mean that God is now only for the Gentiles? He's like, well, no, certainly it can't be that way. I am a Jew, right? He's like, I'm an Israelite. So if God has turned his back on all Israelites, then there's no reason for me to be standing here, is basically what the Apostle Paul is saying. And he takes it even further, and he gives an example, because when he goes into the next few verses, so God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Or do you not know what the scripture says in the passage about Elijah, how he pleads with God against Israel? So that's coming from 1 Kings, where the people have turned against God and they're killing the prophets, and Elijah's basically running for his life, and he runs out into the wilderness, right? He sleeps underneath I think a juniper tree, and then he ends up in a cave, and he's asking God, he's like, God, everybody's forsaken you. I'm the only one left. What are you going to do? And God sends down an angel to care for him, and then gives him a message and says, look, I haven't forsaken the people. There are people whose hearts have not hardened. And you're going to go and here's your tasks. Right? And he's like, here's who you're going to crown king. Here's who you're going to crown king. Here's who your here's who your successor is going to be as a prophet. Anybody know? Anybody remember who's the successor of Elijah?
Jacob.
Elijah and Elisha, right? Right? He hands the mantle to Elisha. I always say it wrong. And so that's what he's told he's going to do. And in the midst of all that, God says, there are 7,000 men who have not bowed their knee to Baal. That they still believe in me. And with you, we will rise them up. And so what the Apostle Paul is doing here is saying, look, there are men in the Jewish community. There are Israelites who have turned to Jesus. And God is not going to forsake Israel. And we never should. And sort of a personal aspect of it, until I started doing the study here again, I never really looked at it in that deep of an aspect of how Elijah was called to hand the mantle to Elisha to then raise up these men. And here, if you think about it, this is Jesus Christ handing the mantle to the Apostle Paul to go rise up these men. I want to be careful about that because it just hit me like as I was doing my study, and I was like, I want to share it, but I don't want to go too deep into it because I didn't actually delve really deep into it. That's just sort of what hit me. Now I want to get to the part where all of this turns, and the part where it really means something for all of us. Because when he gets further down, anybody want to tell me what the two examples he brings up a couple metaphors. Anybody want to tell me what the two metaphors are?
The dough and the tree.
The dough and the tree. Okay? And first in the dough, he says, look, if just one part broken off that dough is holy, then all of it is holy. But more importantly, for my message today, is the metaphor of the tree. Because he starts talking about pruning a tree. And which then, if you know Scripture, right, you go back into the teachings of Jesus. Jesus talks about, right, the branches and the vine. And the Apostle Paul says, what keeps the tree alive, I'm paraphrasing all this and sort of make it make sense, okay? He says, what's keeping the tree alive is the root, right? The foundation. That's the life of the tree. And any work that you do on the tree, it will live or die based on the root. And if the root is going to give it nourishment. And if because he's talking about cutting branches off and then grafting them back on. Or grafting on different branches. And that's what he's saying about the Gentiles. So if you use this metaphor, he goes, here is the Israelites, right? Here is the nation that God has raised up in this essence of a tree. The root is God. God is the foundation of it. God is what's giving it life. And there are branches that have broken off. There are branches that God has trimmed off of this tree. Because they're not part of the life that God... But then he says, even if it's... Because then he starts talking about an olive tree, right? So he goes, if you take these other branches and you graft them onto this tree, and if they are properly bound, they'll grow and they'll flourish, right? I mean, we know this today because that's how they come up with hybrid different kinds of pears and apples and... Right? I mean, you've heard about farmers grafting trees. That's what they're doing, right? And that's what he's saying. He goes, in this world of the Israelites, God has allowed for the Gentile, the branches of the Gentile, to be grafted onto this tree. But then he gives a warning. He said, but remember. Well, first he gives a blessing. Let me say this first. First he gives a blessing to the Israelites who have turned away. He said, even if I've taken branches from different trees and I've grafted them on and they'll be healthy, I could certainly take the branches from that original tree and graft it back on and they will be healthy. But just as God can graft on any branch to the tree, he can also cut it off again. Because it's up to the branch to receive the nourishment. It's up to the branch to actually grow. It's up to the branch to do its part. And it's the warning that he starts to give moving forward, which is where we start to get into the argument of faith and works. Or we get into it again. I mean, we've been through this since the first chapter of Romans. Because when you read that just straight out, he's saying, well then, if God, it's by God's grace that we've been grafted grafted into this family, and it's, by God's judgment that we can be cut off again, what prohibits him from cutting us off? I want to go back to the idea, the metaphor of us today. So who here has ever had to trim off a branch from a tree in real life? Like most of you. Who here has ever watched anybody trim a branch off of a tree? There, now we got everybody else's hands. Right? So why did you trim the branch off?
It's in my way.
Yeah.
It was in your way.
Yeah.
Any other reason?
Inhibit new growth.
Yeah.
Yeah, make the tree.
So you got rid of the dead stuff. You got rid of the unhealthy stuff. You got rid of the stuff that wasn't being productive. The stuff that was in the way.
Something that will put my eye out.
Right? So, God doesn't give this unjust decision. If you are grafted into the family of God, and you are doing your best to be healthy, and to grow, and to not be in people's way, but to actually produce good fruit, right? Right? Because if that branch might be hanging down a little bit, poking in your eye, but if it's giving you the best Honeycrisp apples you've ever had in your life, you're going to leave the branch there, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Right?
I'm still waiting for an apple.
So it's
Yes.
right? So we get rid of the branches, and God gets rid of the branches that have already rejected the tree or rejected the health of the tree. God's just going to cut out the dead stuff. So that's the warning as we go into the next few chapters of the book of Romans, is what does it mean to actually be, to accept Jesus Christ. Say, yes, I want to be on this tree. I want to be a part of this. And that's really all. I mean, chapter 11 is not real long. That is the meat of it. That's what he's talking about. He goes back. He talks about he uses some more Old Testament comparisons. And let me read this up so it makes sense. So he says in chapter 25, "For I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fulfillment of the Gentiles has come in." So this is the second part of it, is, and I wasn't going to share that today, but now it's just laid in my heart. I had this laid out, because I'm not really sure how it applies to us today. When I share a lot of this, I want to know how, not just the understanding of it, but how does it apply to us. And according to the Apostle Paul, part of the idea of the Gentiles being received in is that the Israelites who felt like they had God all to themselves are going to be jealous and are going to be upset. And that by that, they will actually have a softening of their hearts, not a hardening of their hearts. And I only share that in the aspect of where we are today, with different denominations and with different expectations, that we should always have an accepting nature of people coming to Jesus Christ, which I don't have much of a message on, because I feel like we do. And if we don't, I hope God opens our eyes about it. So, does that make sense? That's really all. I don't have a huge, it's just meat and potatoes this week on chapter 11. But setting up for the idea of God's sovereignty. I mean, that's really what the chapter was all about. Was that, it's by God's grace. God is in control, and He allows us to have this opportunity. And then the rest of this, as we go into our Christmas season, is going to be, all right, well, what do we do with it then? Amen? Any questions? I was really hoping for questions today.
Okay.
Oh, no.
Alright.
Go ahead.
So basically what you're saying is that we have to try to do our best to be like God, and then we'll be fine.
So, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, be holy because the Lord your God is holy, right? But the careful part about this is doing the works, right, to try and be like God isn't what's going to actually make you holy. It's the intention of your heart in doing the works.
Okay.
I think that's where a lot of people get caught up in the whole faith or works thing. So if you just do the job, if you show up for 8 hours a day, right, and get the paycheck, right? Let me use this example that just popped in my head as I started to ramble about that. Okay? You and somebody else have been at the same job for the same amount of time. Okay? You show up for work, all you ever talk about is gravel biking and wanting to get your next gravel bike. And you work from 7 to 3. You punch in at 6:59, you punch out at 3:01. Right? Get your paycheck, and at 3:02 you don't think about your job. Okay? And even while you're there, you're doing what you have to, right? But the other dude, he punches in at 6:55, he's at his machine by 6:59, right? He leaves his machine at 3 o'clock, punches out at like 3:10. And while he's there, it's constantly interacting with the higher up, seeing where else can we go with this? What do you want? Where's the company going? How can I help things with the company? Oh, here's some issues I see. Where can I, right? He's constantly in conversation with and following what the leader's saying. Not just saying, well, look, I got the shirt, I work for the company. So at the end of the day, when the leader says, well, somebody's going to get a promotion, who's it going to be? Right? Or, let me put it a different way, it's not even a promotion, because God doesn't give promotions. Then I'm going to start arguing about the talents, right? But if God says, or the leader of the company says, all right, we're not being as productive as we need to be right now, somebody's got to get cut. Somebody's getting laid off. Who's keeping his job?
The guy who punched in at
the guy who gave his heart, right? The guy who understood not only the intent, but his commitment to being a part of the company. All right? That's what he's talking about with the trees. Right? Yeah, you still got salvation, but and if there doesn't have to be cuts, yeah, you'll get to, your pension at the end, but you're not going to get the full blessing. I know that analogy breaks down after time, but there is no perfect worldly analogy to the relationship we have with God.
So it's like two brothers or two sisters, and they're both told to do something. And one might say, oh yeah, I'll do it, Mom, I'll do it later. And then the other one says, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But in the end, the one who didn't want to do it actually did it. And the one who said that was going to do it didn't do it. So this is where the heart comes in for the person who didn't want to do it but actually did it.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, but then, well, so while that's an interesting comparison, we could go way off in a theological debate about that, because you have to believe it with your heart and speak it with your tongue, right? So you got one who's speaking it with the tongue but not believing it in the heart, right, and one who's believing it in the heart but not speaking it with the tongue. So both of them are actually in God's eyes at fault. You should want to believe it in your heart and speak it with your tongue.
So by that person who didn't want to do it and did it, God is redeeming him. You know what I'm saying? God is going to be lenient on him, right? I mean, because it changed the heart. Did it change the heart?
That's the argument of doing by works and not by faith.
Uh-huh.
Right? If there are... I have so many Bible verses I want to rattle off right now, right? Because if you go back to the teachings of Jesus, there's a point where he says, there are so many of you who are going to go, Lord, Lord, and Jesus is going to go, I don't know you. Right? So there are today thousands of people who are talking about Jesus, but they're not believing it with their heart. Right? And the idea is that you believe it with your heart, and it's the idea of passion that, you know, we use the comparisons of this is how people come to Jesus Christ, is because they see the differences, they see the changes in people's lives, they see the excitement, they see the peace, they see the joy. You know, they see people being able to come through hardships, and you know, I always say the greatest. I say it because it's factually true. Is the greatest growth in Christian history was during the actual Christian persecutions. I cannot talk today, right? Because other people were going, what is it these people are willing to die for? So, and we're gonna, as we go on, we'll get into that a little bit more, because are you willing to die for God?
It's tough.
His son died for us.
Yeah. So, anything else?